مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. لقد أدو أنا لا أتحدث عن موسيقي إلفيس بريسلي أو موضة الجينز متسع الساكين أو الكاميرات البولارويد. هذا أكثر جدية بكثير. إنني أتحدث عن الروس. لقد أدوا بقوة السعيد العسكري وهم يغيرون وجه السياسة تغييرا جذريا وخاصة في الشرق الأوسط. إن كنت قد نشأت في الخمسينات أو الستينات أو السبعينات فأنت تعرف العالم من خلال عدسة المنافسة بين القوى العظمى، حين عشنا كل يوم في خوف من اندلاع الحرب النووية. انتهى ذلك العصر بسقوط حائط برلين وانهيار الاتحاد السوفيتي، وطوال العشرين عاما التالية كانت روسيا أكبر دولة في العالم، الرجل المريض في أوروبا الشرقية. تأملنا معها بالاحترام الذي نتعامل به مع كبار السن الذين كانوا يوما يفيدون بالنشاط والحيوية ولكنهم الآن ضعفاء ومتعبون. كانت روسيا غير ذات أهمية وخاصة في الشرق الأوسط. تغير ذلك الوضع تحت قيادة فلاديمير بوتين. أصبحت روسيا طرفا فاعلا مؤثرا من جديد. استعرضت إطلالتها في الكرم وأوكرانيا وأرسلت رسالة وعدها في سوريا، حيث قلبت عملياتها العسكرية الموازين للترجح كفة بشار الأسد. وإذا تبدو أمريكا مترددة في اتخاذ إجراءات ملاء الروس الفراغ. ماذا يريد بوتين حقا؟ وكيف يجدر بأمريكا الاستجابة له؟ لمناقشة أحوال روسيا والسياسة الأمريكية اليوم يسرني أن أرحب بأحد كبار الخبراء في بلدنا وهو السفير السابق ستيفن سستونوفيتش. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. I'm sitting here with Stephen Sestanovich to talk about Russia and America in the Middle East. Steve, thanks very much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure.
So let's start with basic terminology. What word do we use? Ally, enemy, adversary, antagonist, competitor? What is Russia for America these days?
Well, Russia is many things. It is an exceedingly complicated relationship. In President Obama's first term, there was the famous reset, an improvement of relations that involved cooperation across many different fronts. And if Russia wasn't considered an ally at that point, because it surely wasn't, it was nevertheless a very helpful partner as Washington saw the relationship. But that was then. And since the crisis in Ukraine especially, Russia has emerged again as more of an adversary and a rival, with this extra qualification. In the Middle East, in Syria, there is now greater consultation and coordination between Russia and the United States than one could have imagined 6 months ago or a year ago. And it represents a real tension in the relationship, because when you look at Europe, Russia and the United States are at odds. When you look at the Middle East, it's much more confusing, and there are some growing elements of cooperation.
Okay, very nuanced answer. That's good. I like having nuanced conversations.
Again, it's not so much nuanced as one thing in one region and another thing in another region.
All right, let's ask another big picture question. Does Russia matter? There was a time when many people thought Russia was certainly not the Soviet Union and didn't matter. Does it matter today in 2016?
Well, yes, is the is the short answer. Russia has asserted itself in the past couple of years more successfully internationally, with greater impact than at any time since the end of the Cold War, and arguably than it has in decades. That is a kind of resurgence that has been marked by the seizure of territory in Europe, by the unexpected deployment of Russian forces in Syria, and it has forced a kind of adjustment on the part of Western policymakers. In Europe, that has been a strong pushback, the resurgence of containment in a way, rebuilding military forces in NATO. There's about to be a NATO summit in which the alliance is going to commit itself to a much stronger policy of deterrence against Russia than it has thought of in many years. And there are going to be a lot of angry words between Moscow and Western capitals. In the Middle East, you've seen Russia taking the military initiative and interposing itself to save the Assad regime in a way that almost no one in the West expected. So even though there were at first predictions that this would be a doomed enterprise, and another crazy move by Putin, it seems to have changed the dynamics of the civil war in Syria in a way that makes leaders around the region think suddenly Russia is a player again. Russia's back. So you see Russia mattering both in very negative ways and then in more mixed ways.
And in your view, what does Russia want?
Well, here we sometimes have to put leaders on the couch and try to read their minds in a way that I think is often unproductive and very speculative. But in the case, in the broadest terms, whether you're looking at Europe or the Middle East, people say Russia wants to be respected, wants to reassert itself as an autonomous great power. If you look more narrowly at Syria, I think it's pretty clear that the big motive, the big issue that Putin thought was in play was saving the Assad regime when it seemed to be going down last fall. You had a period in the second half of last year when it seemed as though the civil war was going to take a new turn, really with the Assad regime being taken out of the picture. Putin's intervention stopped that, turned the tide. And in that respect, Putin has shown something that I think, without too much psychoanalysis, one can say matters to him, which is showing that he is a reliable patron, friend, ally, supporter. When you sign up with Putin, he doesn't let you down. That's his message.
And how would you evaluate, is Russian policy born of resurgent strength, or do you think it reflects deeper weakness?
Well, you know, studying Russia, people always fall in love with dualities and complexities and contradictions. So the standard answer to this would be, well, both strength and weakness. I would give you a more concrete response, which is that Russia's intervention in Syria reflected, just apart from all other political dynamics, reflected the modernization and renewal of the Russian military forces in the past 10 years. In the past 10 years, the Russian military budget has gone up 100%. It's now over 4% of GDP, which is one of the highest among major powers. This was an increase that continued steadily despite the big economic crisis of 2009. 50% of that 100% increase in the past 10 years has been since the economic crisis, when there have been all kinds of problems in the Russian economy. Slower growth, tighter budgets, more difficulty in figuring out how to manage an economy when oil prices were going down and so forth. Nevertheless, Russian defense spending has gone up. And I think, you know, last year when Putin turned to his military people and said, what are we able to do? They surely said to him, boss, we are able to do a lot more than, you know, at any time in the past quarter century. That doesn't mean he had to take their answer, but he had a choice which Russian leaders have not had until recently. That's a measure of strength.
Let's connect this to American policy for a moment. So, to what extent is this Russian reassertion connected to this perception, at least, of American retrenchment?
I think very closely associated. If the necessary condition for Russian intervention was the restoration of their military power, the sufficient condition was, and the question that Putin surely had on his mind was, how's the United States going to react? And here I think his answer had to be affected by what he saw in 2013 with the famous red line. People talk a lot about the importance of credibility in foreign policy and whether it really matters. Academics argue about this all the time. But what President Obama showed Putin in 2013 was, I really don't want to get involved in Syria, no matter how many of my advisors are telling me I should, no matter what the domestic political costs are, no matter what the message sent to my friends and allies in the region may seem, I want to stay out of that. That told Putin that he had a much more, a term that the military use, a permissive environment. He was pushing on an open door. He didn't have to worry that intervention in Syria would lead to a conflict between great powers, worst of all, the United States. And so he had a kind, if not an invitation, at least a greater confidence that he could manage this with the safety that he would want. Putin is not a madman or somebody who takes terrible risks. In fact, the picture that Russians who know him give you is somebody who's rather indecisive, likes to, there's a Russian saying, measure 7 times, cut once. And that's the way in which he operates. He, Russians say, prepared the ground for this intervention very slowly as the Assad regime was maneuvering. But in that period, the picture of American passivity, reluctance to get involved, surely influenced his thinking.
Okay, we'll come back in a moment to discuss more about Russian policy in the Middle East and what the United States should do about it. Steve Sestanovich is one of America's leading experts on all things Russian and all things American foreign policy. He is the George F. Kennan Senior Fellow for Russian and Eurasian Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations and Professor of International Diplomacy at Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs. Previously, he served for 4 years as the State Department's Ambassador at Large for the former Soviet Union. Ambassador Sestanovich is the author of the widely acclaimed book, Maximalist, America and the World from Truman to Obama. He received his undergraduate degree from Cornell University and his doctorate from Harvard. All right, so we've just established what the Russians are doing in an area in which they previously, or at least recently, were not so active. How should America respond? Do we approve? Do we welcome? Do we combat? What do you think is the appropriate American answer to this?
Well, I understand the Obama administration's perplexity. I mean, this is a kind of mess that they've gotten themselves into, and there's no easy way out of it. The administration has decided that the stakes in Syria itself are not sufficiently great to warrant a major involvement by the United States. No boots on the ground. All the political candidates seem to agree on that. It's not an issue where the administration is clearly divided from elite opinion or public opinion. Nevertheless, if you look at the regional consequences of an acquiescence in this dominant Russian role, I think those consequences look more negative. So the first thing that the United States has to address is the impact on all of its other relationships throughout the region, which I think even the Obama administration would say are still an important interest of the United States. And that means Turkey, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Iraq, frankly, the major players in the region, Israel. That's there, the work of shoring up those relationships isn't by itself tied to the Russian intervention, but it is interesting, noticeable that so many governments in the region now seem to be taking the Russians as a kind of principal player whose orientation they need to understand better, with whom they need to accommodate a little bit more. And that's not in itself bad for the United States to have another player in the region. But I think if it invites kind of unpredictable actions by the Russians, that can lead to dangerous situations down the road. And it can lead to a greater difficulty for the United States in containing some of the forces in the region that it's unhappy with, in particular Iran. So in the short term, what the administration is doing, which is to try to see what, you got lemons, you make lemonade. This is an American expression that means make the best of a bad situation. The attempt to get some traction in these, a ceasefire, political talks in Syria doesn't seem like a hopeless idea, but the administration does, and I think it's actually probably wise to play this out a bit, but the administration does risk looking as though it is hopelessly, endlessly deceived by the Russians and by Assad as well, and tagging along in a process that is going absolutely nowhere. The more important goal for the United States is to make sure that its own major relationships in the region are not compromised or affected in some adverse way by the course of events in Syria and by the Russian intervention.
So you mentioned a moment ago about our political elite having no enthusiasm for on-the-ground engagement. So let me ask you how you think the Russians are looking at our political campaign. If they saw the events of 2013 as almost an invitation to act in 2015, how do you think they're reading what's going on in America right now?
They must be as puzzled as any of us. And some of the developments are, even though they may seem favorable to them in some terms, must still be extremely baffling.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us.
A pleasure.
On Dakhel, Washington. بهذا نصل إلى نهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة وخاصة حول استراتيجية روسيا في الشرق الأوسط، أرجو أن تراسلوني مباشرة على عنوان البريد الإلكتروني التالي insidewashington@alhurra.com. معكم روبرت ساتلوف. شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.